This presentation provides an overview of the Book of Daniel, summarizing the principal features and prophecies, as well as covering the inspiring testimony of the prophet Daniel, who remained a faithful servant of God throughout his entire life, even in the face of great opposition and many challenges from the enemies of God and his people. The Book of Daniel is one of the most important prophetic books in the Bible. In the Christian Bible, the Book of Daniel is classified under the four major prophets, the other prophets being Isaiah, Jeremiah and Ezekiel. In the Hebrew or Jewish Bible, known as the Tanakh, it is classified under Ketuvim, or the writings. This is on account of the apocalyptic nature of much of the content of the book. Indeed, the Book of Daniel has strong associations with the Book of Revelation, or the Apocalypse. However, regardless of how we might classify the book, it remains a major source of inspired prophetic information, containing the only definitive prophetic chronology that identifies the coming of the Messiah and his sacrificial ministry. The messianic prophecy known as the 70 weeks of Daniel contains an accurate timeline for the coming of the Messiah, declared well over 500 years before the events found their fulfillment. God also revealed to Daniel the future rise and fall of successive great Gentile empires of the ancient world, empires that would dominate Jerusalem and the people of Judah over predetermined times. We can now verify the accuracy of such revelation from God through the pages of recorded history. This stands as one of the most compelling proofs that the Bible is the infallible and inspired word of the one and only true Almighty God, the God who knows and declares the end from the beginning. Daniel lived during monumental times of upheaval for Israel, and in particular the people of the southern kingdom of Judah. The northern house of Israel had suffered defeat and deportation by the Assyrians around 100 years before the birth of Daniel. History and the Bible records that Judah would also suffer a similar fate under the Babylonians. The people of the northern house of Israel, who were overtaken by the Assyrians between 745 and 720 BC, never returned to their homeland. They were initially resettled by the Assyrians to locations lying to the north and east of the land of Israel, but eventually migrated westward to settle in various parts of Europe and eventually onto the British Isles, having changed their identity as a people in the course of successive generations. In contrast, many of the people of Judah that had been deported to Babylon returned after a period of 70 years as prophesied by Jeremiah. The latter scenario dominates the background to the opening scenes of the Book of Daniel. Chapter 1 opens with Daniel and three other princes of Judah, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, being taken captive to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar. This took place in 605 BC. Each of the four had their name changed to align with the names of Babylonian deities. Daniel was renamed Belteshazzar, meaning Bel shall protect, Hananiah as Shadrach, meaning inspiration of the sun, Mishael as Meshach, meaning slave of Aku, and Azariah as Abednego, meaning servant of Nego. Immediately the faith of Daniel and his compatriots was tested. They refused to indulge in the royal meat and wine and asked to be provisioned instead with pulse and water. At the end of a 10-day trial period they proved superior in health, appearance and alertness than all the others in the royal court. This laid down a marker for the rest of Daniel's time in captivity, which turned out to be the rest of his life. He refused to compromise God's standards by refusing the practices of the heathen under whose authority he lived. On all occasions God upheld his stand. Chapter 2 focuses on Nebuchadnezzar's dream of a great image, which took place during the second year of his reign, between 603 and 602 BC. Nebuchadnezzar dreamed a dream that disturbed him greatly, yet he could not remember the details. Failure of the wise men of Babylon to reveal the dream brought a death sentence on all of them. Daniel intervened and turned to God in prayer, and God responded by revealing the dream and its meaning, which Daniel declared before Nebuchadnezzar. God revealed to Daniel that Nebuchadnezzar had seen a great image composed of different metals. A head of gold, breast and arms of silver, belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, feet and toes partly iron and partly clay. Suddenly a stone cut out without hands smote the image on its feet. The image was smashed to pieces and carried away as chaff before the wind. The stone then grew into a great mountain that filled the earth. This image represented the succession of great Gentile kingdoms on this earth, starting with Babylon, the head of gold. After this would come 3 more kingdoms in succession, yet each of these would ultimately give way to the final 5th kingdom, the kingdom set up by God to last forever. The rise of each of these kingdoms is verified in history, from Babylon to Medo-Persia, followed by Greece and then Rome. Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, bowing before Daniel and acknowledging the supremacy of God. He made Daniel ruler over the province of Babylon, and Daniel then set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over all the affairs of Babylon. Thus God is able to promote and elevate his people in the eyes of God's enemies.
This place was once full of activity, a place of social enjoyment, business, commerce. It was a place of education, pleasure, prosperity, and luxury. Now, it lies in ruins. This is Babylon City. They never would have thought that this well-fortified city could ever be overthrown. But it was. The Babylonians expected prosperity, but their expectation was wrong. It's always very perplexing when bad things happen to us by surprise and we don't understand why. But when something is expected and understood, it gives the mind stability. The author of the book of Daniel came from a ruined city, and he had an expectation, and this gave him stability of mind. God used this man Daniel to give an expectation to the king of Babylon, showing him what would happen to his kingdom and his beloved city. God wants you and me to have an expected end, and he's using the book of Daniel to show us what to expect in these last days. Jeremiah 29 verse 11 tells us,
"For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace, and not of evil, to give you an expected end."
God loves you and wants you to have an expected end. Unlike the Babylonians, we need to take heed to the warnings. I invite you to come with us as we go through the prophecies of Daniel, step by step, to see what God wants us to know. The first thing that we need to understand when studying prophecy is found in 2 Peter chapter 1 and verse 20.
"Knowing this first, that no prophecy of the Scripture is of any private interpretation."
This means that biblical prophecies are not concocted ideas. They are real events that really took place. Therefore, we need the pages of history, we need public knowledge to unlock the prophecies. Before we open the book of Daniel, we need historical context. In the year 760 BC, Assyria was driving for world domination. The capital city, Nineveh. The Assyrians were among the most feared and hated people of ancient times. And because of their wicked deeds, this nation's time was quickly drawing to an end. And as always, God wanted to give a warning before destruction. So God sent Jonah to Nineveh. And you can probably imagine why Jonah did not want to go, considering it was the metropolis of the world, it was crushing nations around it, and Jonah's own country was on their hit list. But after his uncomfortable Mediterranean detour, Jonah did go to Nineveh. And the warning was heeded to. From king to peasant, all repented. And God turned away from the judgment that was to come upon Assyria. This warning was lost sight of. And by 745 BC, Tiglath-Pileser III ascended the throne. And he took Assyria to new heights. The pages of history tell us
Tiglath-Pileser III, king of Assyria, 745 to 727 BC, inaugurated the last and greatest phase of Assyrian expansion. He subjected Syria and Palestine to his rule, and later he merged the kingdoms of Assyria and Babylonia.
It was during the reign of Tiglath-Pileser III that Isaiah began his ministry. And God used Isaiah to give a warning to his people of the impending Assyrian invasion.
O Assyrian, the rod of mine anger, and the staff in their hand is mine indignation. I will send him against an hypocritical nation, and against the people of my wrath will I give him a charge, to take the spoil and to take the prey, and to tread them down like the mire of the streets.
During Isaiah's ministry, the kingdom of Israel was already divided into two parts. The northern kingdom, Israel, was comprised of 10 tribes, and its capital was Samaria. The southern kingdom, Judah, was comprised of 2 tribes, and its capital was Jerusalem. The ministry of Isaiah was conducted in the southern kingdom of Judah. The northern kingdom, Israel, had rejected warning after warning given by Elijah, Elisha, and Amos. And around 750 BC, Hosea sounded the final call. Hosea testified of the spiritual adultery taking place in Israel. Israel was trying to serve 2 masters, a bit of God and a bit of Baal. It's like a bit of Christ and a bit of the world, a bit of hot and a bit of cold. Israel became lukewarm, and Hosea's message was unheeded. And now Israel was without a prophet. And as the Bible says, where there is no vision, the people perish.
For the children of Israel walked in all the sins of Jeroboam which he did. They departed not from them, until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight, as he had said by all his servants the prophets. So was Israel carried away out of their own land to Assyria unto this day.
These words of Scripture were fulfilled over a 10-year period. In 732 BC, Tiglath-Pileser took control of the northern portion of Israel. By 722 BC, King Shalmaneser came to complete the job. But Shalmaneser died while besieging the rebellious city of Samaria. And in the same year, his brother Sargon took control and completed the conquest and scattered Israel, while Judah remained.
Therefore thus saith the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, He shall not come into this city, nor shoot an arrow there, nor come before it with shields, nor cast a bank against it. By the way that he came, by the same shall he return, and shall not come into this city, saith the Lord. For I will defend this city, to save it for mine own sake, and for my servant David's sake.
Wherever there is great success, there is pride and arrogance. In 705 BC, Sennacherib ascended the throne of Assyria. And in his conquests, he came to the city of Jerusalem. He stood outside the city wall and mocked the people, saying, the Egyptians' God couldn't help them, the Medes' God couldn't help them, and all the nations' gods couldn't help them. Then Sennacherib boastfully said, neither can your God help you. But God had a big lesson to teach Sennacherib. And this lesson is recorded in Isaiah chapter 37.
Then the angel of the Lord went forth, and smote in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. And when they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. So Sennacherib king of Assyria departed, and went and returned and dwelt at Nineveh.
185,000 troops dead. Understandably, Sennacherib went straight home to Nineveh and stayed there. From then on, history tells us that Sennacherib engaged more in architectural work than in global conquests. But God had another warning to give to Assyria, and this is recorded in Isaiah chapter 10 and verse 12.
Wherefore it shall come to pass, that when the Lord hath performed his whole work upon Mount Zion and on Jerusalem, I will punish the fruit of the stout heart of the king of Assyria and the glory of his high looks.
God always gives time for people to repent. And so time went on in the Assyrian Empire. By 699 BC, Ashurbanipal, the last great king, ascended the throne of Assyria. By 640 BC, God chose Nahum to be his prophet. Before the Assyrian Empire started declining, God sent Nahum to give a very clear warning to Nineveh of its destruction, as Jonah did over 100 years before, because God wanted Assyria to have an expected end.
Behold, I am against thee, saith the Lord of hosts, and I will discover thy skirts upon thy face, and I will show the nations thy nakedness, and the kingdoms thy shame. And I will cast abominable filth upon thee, and make thee vile, and will set thee as a gazing stock. And it shall come to pass that all they that look upon thee shall flee from thee, and say, Nineveh is laid waste. Who will bemoan her? Whence shall I seek comforters for thee?
Ashurbanipal rejected the warnings given by Nahum the prophet, and by 627 BC he died. Assyria then fell into civil war, and by 620 BC a man from the tribe of the Chaldees named Nebuchadnezzar gained control of Babylon. In 612 BC, he sent his armies from Babylon to Nineveh. The general of the army was Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar completely annihilated Nineveh. And by 605 BC, he ascended the throne as sole ruler when his father, Nebuchadnezzar, died. And now God raises Daniel to give a warning to Nebuchadnezzar. After Nineveh was destroyed in 612 BC, the Assyrian kingdom was divided into three main powers. Media controlled the north and northeast. Babylon controlled Elam and the plains of the Euphrates and the Tigris. Egypt controlled everything west of the Euphrates and North Africa. It was within this division that Egypt controlled that this city, Jerusalem, found herself paying homage to Egypt. The kingdom of Judah became a vassal unto the king of Egypt. This city trusted in Egypt for security, instead of trusting to the Most High that ruleth in the kingdoms of men. The divine record shows us this in 2 Kings 23.
And Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim the son of Josiah king in the room of Josiah his father, and turned his name to Jehoiakim, and took Jehoahaz away. And he came to Egypt and died there. And Jehoiakim gave the silver and the gold to Pharaoh, but he taxed the land to give the money according to the commandment of Pharaoh. He exacted the silver and the gold of the people of the land, of every one according to his taxation, to give it unto Pharaoh Necho.
The growing power and ambition of Babylon soon led to a clash with Egypt. The Babylonian crown prince Nebuchadnezzar was taking control from his aging father. In 607 BC, Nebuchadnezzar embarks on a military campaign. This campaign took them, among other places, to Carchemish. It was there that the armies of Egypt and Babylon met during 605 BC, which was the 4th year of Jehoiakim's reign over Judah. In this battle at Carchemish, Pharaoh Necho and Nebuchadnezzar fulfilled the words of God in Jeremiah chapter 46.
The word of the Lord which came to Jeremiah the prophet against the Gentiles. Against Egypt, against the army of Pharaoh Necho king of Egypt, which was by the river Euphrates, in Carchemish, which Nebuchadrezzar king of Babylon smote in the 4th year of Jehoiakim the son of Josiah king of Judah. the word that the Lord spake to Jeremiah the prophet, how Nebuchadrezzar king of Babylon should come and smite the land of Egypt. Declare ye in Egypt, stand fast and prepare thee, for the sword shall devour round about thee. The Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, saith, Behold, I will punish the multitude of No, and Pharaoh, and Egypt, with their gods and their kings, even Pharaoh, and all them that trust in him. And I will deliver them into the hand of those that seek their lives, and into the hand of Nebuchadrezzar king of Babylon, and into the hand of his servants.
Egypt and their allies were overcome and put to flight in a single battle. Nebuchadnezzar stripped Pharaoh of his conquests and drove him back into Egypt. The completeness of this victory is recorded in 2 Kings chapter 24.
And the king of Egypt came not again any more out of his land, for the king of Babylon had taken from the river of Egypt unto the river Euphrates all that pertained to the king of Egypt.
History tells us that after this victory, Nebuchadnezzar's father died on the 16th of August, 605 BC. Within 3 weeks, Nebuchadnezzar was back into Babylon and ascended the throne as sole ruler, although he was already joint ruler in 607 BC, 2 years before. It was during this military campaign that Nebuchadnezzar came to this city, Jerusalem, and besieged it. It was the 3rd year of Jehoiakim's reign over Jerusalem. This was the accomplishment of the first words of the book of Daniel.
In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim king of Judah came Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim king of Judah into his hand, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God.
It would have been a hard thing to have lived here and witnessed the terrors of battle, seeing your beloved city and the temple destroyed, the treasures taken, and worst of all, the young, talented children of the royal house taken captive. But God had given Jerusalem a very clear warning of what to expect. He warned them through his prophet Isaiah 107 years beforehand. And this is found in 2 Kings chapter 20.
And Isaiah said unto Hezekiah, Hear the word of the Lord. Behold, the days come that all that is in thine house, and that which thy fathers have laid up in store unto this day, shall be carried into Babylon. Nothing shall be left, saith the Lord. And of thy sons that shall issue from thee, which thou shalt beget, shall they take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon.
The Hebrews were taken captive into Babylon in 606 BC. This marks the beginning of the 70-year prophecy spoken by Jeremiah the prophet. As Daniel and his 3 friends went into Babylon, they went via Haran, and thus they retraced the steps that Abraham originally made when he was called out of the land of the Chaldees. These young men would have been greatly discouraged as they went into Babylon. But you can imagine how much comfort they received by the words recorded here in Jeremiah.
For thus saith the Lord, that after 70 years be accomplished at Babylon, I will visit you, and perform my good word toward you, in causing you to return to this place. For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace, and not of evil, to give you an expected end. Then shall ye call upon me, and ye shall go and pray unto me, and I will hearken unto you. And ye shall seek me and find me, when ye shall search for me with all your heart. And I will be found of you, saith the Lord, and I will turn away your captivity, and I will gather you from all the nations, and from all the places whither I have driven you, saith the Lord. And I will bring you again into the place whence I caused you to be carried away captive.
Daniel and his 3 friends sought the Lord during this catastrophic event, and they found God to be a personal comfort and guide. Have you found God in your calamities? Welcome to Babylon City, the hub of the ancient world. Never before or after has there been a city like this. The Bible calls it the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees' excellency. On entering this city, Daniel and his companions were immediately placed in the Babylonian education system. In 603 BC, their third year, they completed their education, and in the same year entered the service of the king. Nebuchadnezzar was in his second year reign as sole ruler, which was his fourth year reign, according to Jewish chronology, commencing when he was joint ruler with his father. Events occurred that severely tested the integrity of these youthful Hebrews and proved to an idolatrous nation the power and faithfulness of God.
And in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him.
This remarkable dream made a deep impression upon the mind of Nebuchadnezzar, but he found it impossible to recall the particulars. History tells us why this was such a problem for the king.
In Mesopotamia, the king was viewed as the cultic mediator between God and man. As head of all the priests of the country, he had important cultic functions at the New Year's festival. The king may be the recipient of a direct revelation of the will of a god. In Mesopotamia, the duty of the king to ascertain the will of the gods was more strongly emphasized. A directive of the gods could result from omens, dreams, or reading the entrails of offerings. All major undertakings of the king were dependent on directives of the god, who was to be consulted in advance.
So forgetting the dream was like forgetting a direct revelation from God about future events. And that's exactly what it was.
Then the king commanded to call the magicians and the astrologers and the sorcerers and the Chaldeans, for to show the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king.
The king called for all the spiritualistic groups in Babylon, but not for Daniel and his friends. Why? Because they did not belong to such classes of people. The king offered great rewards for revealing the dream or a gruesome death for failing to fulfill his demands. The king did not get his request.
For this cause the king was angry and very furious, and commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. And the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain. And they sought Daniel and his fellows to be slain.
After this decree, Daniel secured extra time from the king. The sacred record tells us that he returned home, informed his companions, and they sought the Lord to unveil the dream to them.
Then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his.
One thing that Daniel realized in this dream that we also need to realize is that God is the ruling power in the affairs of this world. He sets up kings and removes kings to fulfill his own purpose. Daniel had utmost confidence in what God had shown him. He didn't go to the king asking, Is this your dream? Instead, he gave God thanks for showing him the king's matter.
Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and said thus unto him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah that will make known unto the king the interpretation.
Daniel declares plainly to King Nebuchadnezzar that the source of all wisdom, knowledge, and understanding of future events doesn't come from him, but comes from the God of heaven, and that the purpose of God in giving him this dream was to reveal what shall be in the latter days. Daniel then related the dream.
Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron, and part of clay. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth.
As Daniel related the facts, the dream came fresh to the king's mind. Nebuchadnezzar was an idolater. Therefore this image was an object which at once commanded his attention and respect. This image is a comprehensive outline of world history. The glorious kingdom of Babylon formed the head of gold. All following kingdoms decreased in splendor but increased in strength, as shown by the grades of metal. First gold, then silver, brass, and iron. In the latter part of the world's history, a marked change was revealed in the iron mixed with clay, and the stone that destroyed these kingdoms and filled the whole earth with its own. Let us walk through history as we enlarge this interpretation.
This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold.
Nebuchadnezzar reigned over Babylon for 43 years, from 605 BC to 562 BC. It was during this time that his kingdom rose to the nation that was represented by the golden head. Babylon was the recognized center of cultic religion, wealth, and education. Thus it was that all kingdoms and people were under the shadow of her influence and power. Gold flowed into Babylon from all provinces of its empire. The immense treasures gathered by King Solomon in Jerusalem were all taken by Nebuchadnezzar, giving to his kingdom a tremendous amount of gold. The Greek historian Herodotus visited this city about 454 BC and testified to the glory and splendor of this city.
It was the golden kingdom of a golden age. Babylon, its metropolis, towered to a height never reached by any of its successors. Situated in the Garden of the East, laid out in a perfect square 60 miles in circumference, 15 miles on each side, surrounded by a wall 350 feet high and 87 feet thick, with a moat around it of equal cubic capacity. Laid out in luxuriant pleasure grounds and gardens, interspersed with magnificent dwellings, this city, with its 60 miles of moat, its 60 miles of outer wall, its 30 miles of river wall through its center, its hanging gardens, rising terrace above terrace, its 150 gates of solid brass, its temple of Belus, 3 miles in circumference, its perfect arrangement for convenience, ornament, and defense, with unlimited resources. This city was itself a wonder of the world. Never before saw the earth a city like this. Never since has it seen its equal. And there, with nations prostrate at her feet, Babylon was a true queen in peerless grandeur.
The historian Gibbon records that the cities of the Babylonian Empire were plundered for almost 1,000 years, and still there was gold to be found. After the death of Nebuchadnezzar in 562 BC, he was followed by a succession of kings, which ended with Belshazzar and his father, who were overthrown by the Medes and Persians in 539 BC, fulfilling these words.
And after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee.
As silver is of less value than gold, so the Medo-Persian Empire was inferior in splendor, luxury, and magnificence to the kingdom of Babylon, but not in strength. To understand the Medo-Persian Empire, we need some background knowledge on its rulers. The scriptures name 2 individuals who were involved in the overthrow of Babylon. The first one is recorded in Daniel chapter 5.
In that night was Belshazzar the king of the Chaldeans slain. And Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old.
The other individual is recorded in Isaiah chapter 45.
Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him. And I will loose the loins of kings, to open before him the 2-leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut.
Darius was a Mede, and Cyrus was a Persian. The 2 arms of the image represented the alliance between Media and Persia. Cyrus was the son of Cambyses, king of Persia. His mother, Mandane, was the daughter of the Median king Astyages. When Astyages died, his son Cyaxares II, also known as Darius the Mede, took rulership over Media. However, Cyrus held sway over Media and Persia, but was not sole ruler. After Cyrus had taken Babylon, history informs us that he gave authority to his aged uncle, Darius the Mede.
The historian Prideaux says Darius the Mede, that is Cyaxares, the uncle of Cyrus, took the kingdom, for Cyrus allowed him the title of all his conquests as long as he lived.
Although Darius was in his later years, he only ruled by permission of the real conqueror, Cyrus.
And now when the march had brought them into Media, Cyrus turned aside to visit Cyaxares. After they had met and embraced, Cyrus began by telling Cyaxares that a palace in Babylon and an estate had been set aside for him.
Cyrus the Great led the Medo-Persian army against the city of Babylon in 539 BC. He was guided by the Lord to fulfill divine prophecy that was written over 100 years before he was born.
Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him. And I will loose the loins of kings, to open before him the two-leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut. I will go before thee, and make the crooked places straight. I will break in pieces the gates of brass, and cut in sunder the bars of iron. And I will give thee the treasures of darkness, and hidden riches of secret places, that thou mayest know that I, the Lord which called thee by thy name, am the God of Israel.
Not only does God tell of Cyrus's name before he was born, but he also ordained the method of conquering the great city Babylon. Cyrus diverted the river Euphrates, enabling him to march under the wall and through the gate that was left open.
However, by this time the trenches were dug, and Cyrus heard that it was a time of high festival in Babylon, when the citizens drink and make merry the whole night long. As soon as the darkness fell, he set his men to work. The mouths of the trenches were opened, and during the night the water poured in, so that the riverbed formed a highway into the heart of Babylon. When the great stream had taken to its new channel, Cyrus ordered his Persian officers to bring up their thousands, horse and foot alike, the allies to follow in their old order. They lined up immediately, and Cyrus made his own bodyguard descend into the dry channel first, to see if the bottom was firm enough for marching.
After Darius had put Daniel in the lion's den, he died in 536 BC, leaving Cyrus sole ruler over the empire. Cyrus was a believer in religious liberty, and in the same year, 536, he made his famous decree allowing the Jews to return home to Jerusalem, undoing what Nebuchadnezzar had done in 606 BC when he first besieged Jerusalem and took the Jews captive into Babylon, thus completing the prophecy spoken by Jeremiah.
For thus saith the Lord, that after 70 years be accomplished at Babylon, I will visit you, and perform my good word toward you, in causing you to return to this place.
After the death of Cyrus, his son Cambyses II ruled for 7 years, from 530 to 523 BC. In 522, his younger brother Smerdis held the scepter for 7 months. Then in 521 BC, Darius the Persian, also known as Darius the Great, ascended the throne. It was under his rulership that the empire answered most fully to the silver of the great image. He also expanded the empire to its height.
Darius conducted the introduction of a universal currency, the daric. Darius applied the coinage system as a transnational currency to regulate trade and commerce throughout his empire. Early in his reign, Darius wanted to organize the loosely organized empire with a system of taxation. To do this, Darius created 20 provinces and specified fixed tributes that the satrapies were required to pay in daric. There were 2 types of daric, a gold and a silver. Only the king could mint gold darics. Important generals and satraps minted silver darics, thus making the silver daric the most prevalent by far. The daric was a major boost to international trade. Trade goods such as textiles, carpets, tools, and metal objects began to travel throughout Asia, Europe, and Africa. To further improve trade, Darius built a royal highway, a postal system, and Phoenician-based commercial shipping. During Darius's Greek expedition, he had begun construction projects in Susa, Egypt, and Persepolis. He had linked the Red Sea to the River Nile by building a canal, which ran from modern Zacchaeus to modern Suez in 497 BCE. Darius also built a canal to connect the Red Sea and the Mediterranean.
Thus, silver poured into Persepolis, the capital of the empire. This silver-rich kingdom became a true pioneer in global economy. It was this King Darius that gave the second decree to rebuild Jerusalem. After his death, Xerxes, the husband of Queen Esther, became extremely wealthy as a result of this inherited economy. Xerxes was succeeded by Artaxerxes, who gave the third decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem in 457 BC. After his death, Medo-Persia continued for another 93 years, ending with Darius III, who lost the kingdom to Alexander the Great in 331 BC. Welcome to this ancient citadel, known as the Acropolis. This place was brought to ruins by Xerxes, the husband of Queen Esther, in 480 BC during the Battle of Salamina. During the time of the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greeks were not a united people. Greek territory was made up of many city-states, each having their own king or government. Fighting among these states was common. Athens and Sparta have become notorious for such battles. Within the northern state of Macedon, a man named Philip ascended the throne in 359 BC. King Philip II of Macedon united the greater part of Greece through diplomacy and warfare. In 337 BC, he created the League of Corinth. Many of the city-states became members of this league. In 336 BC, he died, leaving a united Greece to his successor and son, Alexander. With this united front, the young king Alexander was now in a position to lead the Greeks to the fulfillment of biblical prophecy.
And another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth.
Brass was used by God to represent the Greek Empire, although the brass of the Bible is referring to a copper alloy known today as bronze. Thus we have the three classical metals: gold, silver, and bronze.
The Greeks were experts at smelting bronze. The soldiers wore breastplates of bronze, helmets of bronze, carried shields of bronze, and used swords made from bronze.
The success of the Greek and Macedonian army was largely found in their leader, Alexander. At age 13, Alexander was schooled by Aristotle. At age 16, he was a warrior in the army. At age 18, he was general. At age 20, he was proclaimed king. At age 26, he had conquered the Persian Empire and was named Lord of Asia. Throughout all his life, he never lost a battle. And then, on the 10th of June, 323 BC, Alexander died in Babylon. When Alexander the Great died, he left behind a huge empire.
Alexander's empire stretched from his homeland of Macedon through the Greek city-states that his father had subdued, to Bactria and parts of India in the east. It included Anatolia, the Levant, Egypt, Babylonia, and Persia.
Without a chosen heir, there was an immediate dispute among his generals as to who should be his successor. This was the beginning of the Hellenistic period of Greek history. Greek territory was ruled by several Greek dynasties for over 160 years, until the iron power of Rome was felt. Hellenization denotes the spread of Greek language, culture, and population into the former Persian Empire after the death of Alexander. Greece was now the world-dominating power. But she was altogether different from the preceding two. Instead of gaining control through the power of government or religion, the Greeks gained control of the world through the power of the intellect, through education, arts, exploration, literature, theatre, architecture, music, mathematics, philosophy, science, and Olympic sports. But in 168 BC, the Roman army defeated the Macedonian and Greek allies in the Battle of Pydna. Greece then was incorporated into the Roman Empire. So far, God has used metals to represent three kingdoms with perfect accuracy. We will now see why God chose iron to represent the fourth.
And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things. And as iron that breaketh all these shall it break in pieces and bruise.
This is undoubtedly the Empire of Rome. The secular historian Edward Gibbon makes this remarkable statement regarding her iron power.
The arms of the Republic, sometimes vanquished in battle, always victorious in war, advanced with rapid steps to the Euphrates, the Danube, the Rhine, and the ocean, and the images of gold or silver or brass that might serve to represent the nations and their kings were successively broken by the iron monarchy of Rome.
Rome was the largest and longest lasting of all preceding kingdoms. The iron in the image shows us that Rome will last until the end of Earth's history. However, there are two phases of iron. One is iron alone, the other is mixed with miry clay. This is fulfilled in the pagan Roman Empire and the papal Roman Empire. The political philosopher Thomas Hobbes makes this interesting observation in the 1600s regarding papal Rome.
And if a man considers the original of this great ecclesiastical dominion, he will easily perceive that the papacy is none other than the ghost of the deceased Roman Empire, sitting crowned upon the grave thereof, for so did the papacy start up on a sudden out of the ruins of that heathen power.
Throughout Roman history, Rome has had 7 differing heads of government. The first were kings ruling the kingdom. Next, Rome became a republic and were headed by consuls, which are 2 elected individuals holding office at the same time. Each consul had veto power over his colleague. The third was called a decemvirate, which is a Latin term meaning 10 men. These elected 10 men held the Roman administration from 451 BC to 449. Another head was called a triumvirate, which is simply a coalition of 3 men in administration. Yet another ruler Rome had were dictators. Dictators were dispersed throughout the history of the Roman Republic. The most famous of these would be Julius Caesar, who was declared perpetual dictator in 45 BC. The 6th head of government, emperors. Emperors differ from kings because an emperor is a king of kings. For example, King Herod was subservient to the emperor of Rome. Also, an emperor rules an empire as opposed to a kingdom. After the Germanic tribes dominated Rome, Rome was finally ruled by popes. Still today, the seat of the papal Roman Empire is located in the city of Rome. Rome began as a kingdom in around 753 BC. The first king was Romulus, who founded the city and named it after himself. The last king was an Etruscan king named Lucius Tarquinius Superbus. He was proud, tyrannical, and lost favour in the eyes of the people. It was said that Lucius was a source of the phrase, the tall poppy syndrome.
According to Livy, Tarquin cut off the heads of the tallest poppies in his garden as an allegory to instruct his son Sextus to pacify a recently conquered enemy city by executing its leading citizens. This is one of the many stories which leads to the modern expression of tall poppy syndrome to describe the phenomenon of tearing down individuals who rise too far above the majority.
After Sextus violated a Roman noblewoman, the Tarquin family were removed from power and driven out by Roman aristocrats in 509 BC. At this time, the Roman Republic was formed. It was under the Republic that Rome came to be as strong as iron. Rome's expansion of territory commenced with the domination of the Italian peninsula. Rome then turned her eyes across the Mediterranean and fought 3 wars against their North African rival Carthage. These were known as the Punic Wars. It was during the Second Punic War that King Philip V of Macedon made an alliance with Carthage's general Hannibal. This annoyed Rome, so Rome then took on these 2 powerful kingdoms at the same time: Carthage in the west and Macedon in the east. Rome first went to war with the Greek kingdom of Macedon in 214 BC and again in 200 BC. Rome then gained a decisive victory against the Greeks at Pydna in 168 BC, reducing Macedonia to a Roman province. By this time, Rome dominated much of the Greek territory. Although winning the wars against Carthage and the Greeks, Rome was financially and emotionally drained due to the loss of thousands of soldiers in bloody battles. So then how could Rome be as strong as iron if it was in this weak state? Well, one thing was clear, that an unprofessional citizen army was no longer adequate for an empire the size of Rome. Gaius Marius, a statesman and general of the Roman Republic, initiated a group of military reforms which profoundly shaped the future of the Roman power. Up until this time, the Roman army was made up of the wealthier, land-owning citizens of Rome. It was a seasonal army, so it was formed only when the need arose. Each soldier had to provide their own equipment. This all became a dutiful exercise to defend their land and increase the borders of the Roman Empire. But the policies of Marius, which greatly improved the military, hinged upon the selfishness of the human heart. Here are some of the reforms.
In 30 BC, the Imperial Roman army was established. All Roman citizens who joined the army, including the poor, were paid well for their service. Thus it became a career. For the first time, the Roman state provided equipment to all, giving uniformity to their force. Each soldier was equipped with a short iron sword called a gladius, a spear called a pilum, iron chest armor, and a long rectangular shield. The soldiers were offered inducements and bonuses through spoils gained in conquering new territory. Retirement benefits in the form of land grants were also provided. This was very enticing for the landless poor citizens of Rome. They were required to enlist for some 20 years of full military service, but many served as long as 30 to 40 years, thus giving Rome a standing professional army.
Can you see how these policies played on human greed? For many of the soldiers, it was all about personal gain. Look at what the prophet John the Baptist had to say to these Roman soldiers.
And the soldiers likewise demanded of him, saying, And what shall we do? And he said unto them, Do violence to no man, neither accuse any falsely, and be content with your wages.
The Roman generals had an iron grip on their soldiers, not only through the pleasure of personal gain, but through the use of extreme discipline. Here's an example.
Decimation was a form of military discipline used by senior commanders in the Roman army to punish mutinous or cowardly soldiers. The word decimation is derived from Latin, meaning removal of a tenth. A cohort selected for punishment by decimation was divided into groups of 10. Each group drew lots, sortition, and the soldier on whom the lot fell was executed by his 9 comrades, often by stoning or clubbing. The remaining soldiers were often given rations of barley instead of wheat.
When you compare these methods with dutiful service to a king or state like other kingdoms, you get a glimpse at the secret behind the strength of Rome. As a result of the military reforms made by Marius, the Roman generals, who were often political leaders, became too powerful within the Roman Republic. This caused the downfall of the Republic and the beginning of the emperors. The first emperor was Gaius Octavius, also known as Caesar Augustus. He became emperor in 27 BC. Augustus was the emperor when Jesus Christ was born. His successor, Tiberius Caesar, was emperor during Christ's crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension. Augustus also played on the base nature of man through pleasure and fear in order to have an iron control not only over the military, but also over the populace of the Roman Empire. At this point in Roman history, unemployment was high. Large agricultural estates were supported by government grants, and these estates exploited slave labour from conquered lands. Small farms couldn't compete and gradually went out of business. This caused an influx of the unemployed into the cities. Augustus maintained control of these idle citizens through the pleasure and fear principle.
The Emperor Augustus was well aware of this risk and was keen to keep the poorest plebeians happy enough and reasonably well fed so that they would not riot. He began the system of state bribery that the writer Juvenal described as bread and circuses. Free grain and controlled food prices meant that plebeians could not starve, while free entertainment such as chariot races and gladiators in amphitheatres and the Circus Maximus meant that they would not get bored and restless. Bribery it may have been, but it often worked.
Bread and circuses gave the people an addiction to the Western lifestyle that Rome promoted. Rome built many entertainment centres in order to keep the masses amused.
About 230 Roman amphitheatres have been found across the area of the Roman Empire. They were used for events such as gladiator combats, chariot races, venations or animal slayings, and executions. Amphitheatres are distinguished from circuses, from hippodromes, which were usually rectangular and built mainly for racing events, and from stadia, built for athletics. Imperial amphitheatres comfortably accommodated 40,000 to 60,000 spectators, or up to 100,000 in the largest venues, and were only outdone by the hippodromes in seating capacity.
Rome also employed capital punishment as a penalty for disobedience or rebellion. The Apostle Paul was charged before the Roman government for being a ringleader of a worldwide uprising.
For we have found this man a pestilent fellow, and a mover of sedition among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes.
Consequently, Paul was brought before Nero in Rome and was beheaded for his Christian faith. Nero marks the beginning of the Christian persecution.
These persecutions, beginning under Nero about the time of the martyrdom of Paul, continued with greater or less fury for centuries. Christians were falsely accused of the most dreadful crimes and declared to be the cause of great calamities. As they became the objects of popular hatred and suspicion, informers stood ready, for the sake of gain, to betray the innocent. They were condemned as rebels against the empire, as foes of religion, and pests to society. Great numbers were thrown to wild beasts or burned alive in the amphitheatre. Some were crucified, others were covered with the skins of wild animals and thrust into the arena to be torn by dogs. Their punishment was often made the chief entertainment at public fetes. Vast multitudes assembled to enjoy the sight and greeted their dying agonies with laughter and applause.
This policy of offering a combination of rewards and punishment to induce behaviour was the strength of Rome's iron power over the military and the masses. After Nero's death, another dynasty of Roman emperors arose, including Vespasian and his son Titus, who destroyed the city of Jerusalem in AD 70. Rome then continued for another 235 years until the reign of Constantine, which saw the empire divide, the capital city relocate, and a new state religion introduced. From Constantine onward, the Roman Empire was never the same again. Foreign elements were introduced, and the iron began to be mixed with miry clay.